Hello, dear friends. The more complex this becomes, the closer we are to the end of these dark days. Opinion piece: Eastern despotism, orc stew, Asian tyranny, invasive control, principle of fear, single-party systems, concentration of power, JFK Jr. hit on a Greek island. Let's start. It is said that Europe was born on the day that the Athenian army defeated the Persians on the small plain of Marathon. Had it been otherwise, Greece would have become a Persian province, and the path of the West would have been thwarted. This argument is not intended to justify any war. Despotism is a set of attitudes and practices of someone who abuses their superiority of power in dealing with others. A despot is a person who treats their subordinates harshly and abuses their power or authority. Oriental despotism is a form of government in which a single person concentrates all power, governs without laws to limit them, and maintains order through fear, according to Montesquieu, in the spirit of the laws. It is characterized by the absolute and arbitrary power of the despot, the absence of separation of powers, and the total obedience of the subjects. Montesquieu describes Oriental despotism as an extreme type of government in which absolute power is concentrated in a single person, without limits or checks and balances. He presents it as a counterpoint to the Western political regime and as a warning of what could happen if civil liberties are weakened. According to him, in many Asian empires, power was absolute and arbitrary, and despotism was facilitated by the absence of intermediate bodies, such as laws and parliaments. Later, this concept was used to describe centralized Asian states with a highly concentrated bureaucratic apparatus, but the historical basis of them is the Greco-European opposition between a despotic East and a freedom-loving West. Fear. Montesquieu defines fear as the principle of the despotism. Subjects obey out of fear of punishment, not out of respect for the law or the community. In Eastern regimes, where religion and power are closely intertwined, he speaks of a double pressure of religious fear and political terror. In this system, the despot accumulates all power without stable laws or fixed rules. He governs without law or norm, according to his will and whims. There are no institutions to limit his authority, nor are there any intermediary bodies to mediate between the prince and his subjects. The subjects are treated as slaves or serfs. The classical model is the relationship of domination between master and slave, projected onto the political plane. Generalized servitude, the absence of civil liberties, and the insecurity of private property prevail, as everything depends on the ruler's whim. Examples in plural. Today, the term Oriental despotism is used to describe highly centralized authoritarian states with long monarchical traditions and a strong control over society. Some examples that have been described as Oriental despotism are North Korea, due to its hereditary monarchy, total party control, enormous army, omnipresent political police, and near complete isolation of the population. China, due to the extreme centralization of power in the CCP, the gigantic state bureaucracy, and the invasive control over information and social behavior. The absolute monarchies of the Gulf are also mentioned as examples of governments where power is concentrated in a dynastic family, with strong control over religion, the media, and social mobility. The Iranian regime of the Ayatollahs differs from classic oriental despotism in its modern ideological basis and hybrid structure, although both share authoritarian traits such as absolute centralized power and repression. Reset News. An orc stew is a chaotic mix of things, a dish that looks bad or has strange ingredients, or food fit for monstrous creatures. It describes bad, mushy, or unappetizing food prepared by inept cooks. That's geopolitics. According to Juan Osabi, operations to eliminate the dark side worldwide have been underway for decades. He says that globalists had already set in motion compromising movements and operations that had to be dismantled before attacking Iran. In other words, the White Hats had planned ahead for all possible consequences. We are talking about decades of preparation. The assassination of JFK was the trigger that set the White Hats in motion. According to Kerry Cassidy, JFK Jr. is alive, and the White Hats orchestrated his fake death to remove him, his wife, and his sister from danger from the very beginning because they were planning his death. With Onassis' help, he was hidden on one of his Greek islands to live out of the rest of his days. Economy. The Dow Jones experiences its worst week since April, and oil reaches almost $150. The Emirates is about to freeze billions of dollars in Iranian assets after an attack against them. The Iran conflict is disrupting the global flow of oil, testing the energy security of the BRICS. A sudden surge in global energy prices, driven by geopolitical tensions, increases the risk of inflation and financial market volatility, which could delay central bank rate cuts and reshape the global financial system. Middle East. The US destroys an Iranian unnamed drone carrier in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran claims to have attacked a US oil tanker. Iran says it will stop attacking neighboring countries and warns it will not surrender. Airstrikes hit Gulf neighbors after Iranian president's apology. Trump on the attack against an Iranian school, in quotes. We believe Iran did it. The oil crisis hits Asia with its biggest stock market crash. Europe. The ECB warns that 80% of the banking sector depends on Microsoft. France will not get involved in this war against Iran. History shift in the job market in Europe. The UK surpasses Italy in unemployment. Young people in Niger launch a campaign for national sovereignty against France. Greece deploys Patriot missiles and F-16 fighter jets as a shield for Bulgaria. NATO reaffirms its defenses against ballistic missiles after shooting down an Iranian missile aimed at Turkey. Europol warns of an increased risk of terrorism in the EU due to the conflict. Oil and gas prices soar in Europe. Brussels considers the energy impact of the conflict manageable and rules out supply risks. Sweden warns Brussels that EU energy policy could lead to unreasonable prices. Ukraine accuses Hungary of confiscating a bank convoy transporting gold and cash. Spain. Another 229 Spaniards arrived, part of the 4,000 evacuated from the Middle East on a military flight from Oman. The IBEX 35 fell 7% in the first week of the war in Iran. Trump's threat against Spain is impossible to carry out and counterproductive. A threat to the US and counterproductive, according to analysts. That phrase was a bad translation. Spain could need cash from the US or Nigeria to compensate for the Russian blockade. A user traveled to the US in search of investors for Madrid amidst the diplomatic crisis. Portugal aims for a high-speed rail connection between Madrid and Lisbon. The Spanish tax agency is using AI to monitor citizens while they file their tax returns. Ortega Smith expelled for his criticism of Abascal and his executive committee. Los del Río regret that Donald Trump used La Macarena in a video showing attacks against Iran. The song is meant to brighten life, they said. Juan Carlos I, poses in Abu Dhabi with Froilan and confirms he is not attending the regattas due to the war in Iran. Americas. US partially eases sanctions on Venezuela gold. US and Ecuador launch joint military operations against cartels. Trump announces a new coalition against the cartels. Cuba announces the closure of its embassy in Ecuador. Cuba suffered its worst blackouts since the fuel crisis began. Crisis due to a gas pipeline rupture in Peru. Peru suspends gas exports due to an energy emergency. Peru will not attend the Trump summit but is increasingly balancing its ties between China and the US. Bolivia will receive $500 million from the IDB to strengthen its social protection system. Tensions escalate between Chile and the US over sanctions against officials. Soybeans, a key product that brings Argentina closer to China, despite its alignment with the US. Epstein files mention Macri in official documents. And that's all for today. Thanks a lot, dear friends.